Conestee, how are ye? Welcome to Candlelittalespodcast, and this is the post-show chat between myself and Sorcha, and we are recording it via the Zoom interface and via the OBS interface and all the interfaces that are going on. I'm not really sure what's going on. Anyway, thanks very much for tuning in. We'll be talking about the Goddess story that we released, and it's the Goddess series, and it's February after all, and we just had Imbolc and Brigid's Day, and we're actually recording this, believe it or not, it's post-show chat on Imbolc, and it's the last few hours of light of Imbolc, which is basically the day as soon as it gets dark on the 31st of January, as Sorcha told me yesterday. It is Imbolc, and we've going to do a whole series of Goddess stories, and well, it's all kind of thanks to our Patreon supporters, patreon.com/candlelittales. But Sorcha, how are you getting on with this story of yours? How did you find creating a story out of basically kind of nothing? Because you had a different format in this one, didn't you?
Yeah, it was a little bit more freeform. It was a little bit different. I kind of had a couple of different goes at it. It was interesting actually because there was definitely a moment when I was kind of writing it, and my method for kind of rewriting it was to record into my phone, my phone voice notes app, while I was walking along the side of quite a busy road in Tala. Because I was in
As
Tala.
you do.
As you do. Like I was there and I was like, I didn't have anything to do for an hour, and I was like, I just swimming around in my head for a while. And there was a bit where I was like, no, there's a thing there's a thing here. There's a thing here that is not crystallizing. And usually it was kind of an insight into myself as a storyteller, because usually when I have a thing that isn't quite crystallized like that, I take it to the show, uncrystallized. And then when I'm in front of the audience and the music is playing, it will crystallize in the live performance. And it will always be better than anything I can come up with beforehand.
Good old adrenaline. It was your friend.
And it's the adrenaline, it's the field, it's the response of the audience, it's the music, it's the inspiration, it's the being in the moment, it's the being grounded and being fluid. It's like, and it's kind of also like, this is our frequent tug of war about, to rehearse or not to rehearse. But it's also like why I am against rehearsing a lot of the time, because I find you will never get something so good as when it's spontaneous on stage, when it's live. You'll never get. So anyway, that was a moment where I just found myself really missing performance and really missing the live shows.
Yes,
so I feel like I feel like
this content so well, and that's just sorry to cut across you, but the idea of not, I won't get into the conversation, but the idea of building up a repertoire of information, and I guess this story is kind of joining so many fragmented pieces of a puzzle that's been scattered to the four winds, that it's knowing as much as you can kind of know about it, and then artistically coming in to weave it together into some form of flowing narrative. And when you don't have that inspiration and kind of live performance kind of hit, it doesn't quite crystallize.
So I feel like I'll this is probably a piece that I would come back to in the future when we're able to do gigs again. Which is not to say that I'm not like, it's this is the old self-criticism bit where you're like, it's grand, like it'll do.
Oh, Jesus, no. I thought it was beautiful because, again, it's one of those things of what do we really know about Danu and the goddess Danu. And, and we started this, month thinking, okay, we'll do, and we've done Brigid stories, we've done Brigid goddess stories, cloak stories, and there's a good few of them up on YouTube now. Go and subscribe to the channel if you want to check out. Oh man, watching the Sugar Club gig that we recorded live, a little camera stuck down. It looks like you're in the audience as well, watching the show, and with some amazing musicians from that night. And it's up on YouTube now, because it was a year ago, and it was our last big live show before we weren't allowed to do any live shows anymore. And but like we were thinking, what will we kind of do this as our first one? And the idea of, okay, well, you decided to toss and turn, doing a Danu story, doing a mother of all. So it became kind of something that I didn't expect, which was a tribute to the forgotten goddesses of of old that are as old as the hills, as old as the
Yeah.
rivers, as old as the waters of the world themselves, and are there ever present, and yet it's just
And
linked through something ethereal.
and you know what? I think it's probably appropriate that it didn't quite crystallize, because there was definitely the other thing that I really didn't want to do was concretize it too much, because I think that's
Is that
like,
a word?
yeah,
Concretize.
it's when you make something concrete that should be
Class.
abstract, or well,
Concretize.
concretize.
That's a great
I
word.
didn't want to concretize it too much. I didn't want to
Stop concretizing it. Sorry.
exactly. Um,
Gotta use that a few more times.
do you want to wish so I can? No. I
Concretizing my
didn't
silence.
want to solidify it too much, Aaron, because that kind of annoys me. I often find if I'm reading books of mythology and they're like, Danu was this, I'm always like, you don't fucking know that. You made that up. And you are telling people that as if it's a thing. Because we don't know anything about her. We don't know anything about her. She is a big blank in the shape of a river. So and that's the case for a lot of the goddesses, and a lot of the kind of tellings that we do are fairly intuitively kind of woven together between different aspects that we've found and different things that we've come across. And like I didn't want to be too definitive about any of it. So it was a kind of an interesting line to thread between being able to say something, because I also think it's important to say something about these forgotten goddesses. It's important to be able to say, like, this is what I feel about them, and this is what I think about them, and this is where my intuition leads me as I'm thinking about them and as I'm kind of working with them creatively, and kind of being very declarative, like, this is who they were and this is what they did. So like all the stuff about Banba and Fola and Eru, and like the the different kind of, sorry,
The names of Ireland and the different. Is that what you're
yeah,
saying?
the different attributes, the different kind of personalities that we gave them, that
Right.
was stuff that came out of the work we did with the girls in direct provision for this land. Like,
Sure.
you remember when we kind of, and that was like us going, okay, they were married to the son of the wood, the son of the plow, and the son of the sun. What do those concepts mean to us? And it's always like, it's always that thing of, you know, because the way it kind of shook out for us was that we had a goddess of the wild and we had a goddess of the civilization. And then we had a kind of goddess above all, a goddess of the heavens. And that was kind of where it landed in some of those sessions. And so I kind of kept that and went with that, because they're married to who they're married to, McGool, McKechta, McGrania. But like, what those concepts mean to us versus what they meant to our ancestors, we can't really say. Like, you know, I think it's kind of pulling from inspiration of other stories that we know, like that Fianna story where Ireland is divided into the tame and the wild, and only the one who would
Yeah.
choose the wild would be in the Fianna. So there's
Yeah.
definitely kind of like, there are these concepts of like civilization and wildness, and they both kind of existing on the land, and some people prefer one and some people prefer the other. So it kind of made sense to me that Banba would be a goddess of the wild and Fola would be a goddess of the tame and the civilized. And like, those characteristics, then those personalities are very much based on my associations with those things as somebody who lives in the modern world. But I don't know if that's how they operated.
But that's again how mythology gets recreated every generation, every kind of century, whatever. Like as the stories get retold for new listeners, the concepts change, and automatically our perception of the world will alter and have altered. And
Absolutely.
as a result, these mythologies will mean something more, whether they meant something exceptionally more than they do now is impossible to tell, because it was once upon a forgotten time, you know.
Totally. And it's just kind of, it is that thing of, that's why I don't like being too definitive about it, because I think I feel like that kind of closes it down. And one of the things that I wanted to kind of get into in this story was, you know, maybe it's a good thing that the goddess is not tied to form, because we've had a lot of problems in the world by tying God to form and saying
Fuck
God
yeah.
is this thing and he's nothing else. And if you don't believe in what I think he is, then you're bad and not a person.
Oh,
We've had like, there's something about the fact that the goddesses, you know, I don't like. That was kind of where I went with it then as well. Of like, maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe it's kind of a good thing that they're a little bit fluid and they're a little bit loose and they're a little bit less tied down by I'm absolutely one thing or absolutely another thing. And I think you see that in the Celtic goddesses too, like the triplings, in a lot of them, like in Brigid and in the Morrigan, and possibly in Danu herself, and that
speaking
whole
of
kind of maiden mother crone thing.
well, speaking of Danu, like I think you made like to put your ego at ease. I think you did a beautiful job of stylistically kind of having something quite, it basically mirrors the uh, impossibility of putting a story together that is concretizing it, because it's impossible. Like it's so fragmented. All of those very old stories from the mythological cycle are kind of fragmented anyway, and we have various attempts of putting them back together, but Danu was mentioned in the one sentence in the Leabhar Gabhala, written in the 12th century, as far as I can find out. And she's just called the Mother Goddess. And as a result, there have been a number of authors who have kind of made her the mother of all of the Tuatha Danann and the kind of the mother goddess who slept with Dagda, who's known as the father god, and kind of put two and two together and came up with that equation. And but the actual what we know about her, again, as you allude to in the story itself, her is completely. Is she the same goddess as the Danube is named after? Is
Yeah,
she? Could have been, I
probably.
guess. The Celts
Yeah,
came from
else
Europe.
came from Europe. Like, because
Uh,
it's like that's one of the fascinating things about Danu is that like there are rivers, and the Danube is just the biggest one, but there are rivers and streams throughout Europe that have that name as its root, and it's all traced to her, Danu or Anu. And there are various different kind of remnants of her in folklore around the place, and probably the strongest one is in the Irish of the Tuatha Dé Danann,
hmm.
the people of the goddess Anu. um but like there
And
she's around, you know what I mean?
yeah, totally,
And
totally.
yet, like as you say, completely forgotten. Like this is one of the things that we often talk about, or I find myself often talking about, the idea of being in a ruptured tradition. We had because you've had a lot of that in Europe throughout the centuries. It has been a very war-torn continent for a very long time, up until World War II. In fact, and that was the point of the EU was to stop, because previous centuries to that, Europe has been continually at war with itself for you know centuries and centuries and centuries, and like going right back to the Romans at war with the Celts and driving them back and back and back to Ireland and Scotland and the kind of edges of Europe. And there was a
Sure.
certain amount of Christianizing influence then as well, like of doing battle with the gods. But like it's all
I
ruptured.
mean, it's ruptured, and it's so funny to compare it again to kind of like Greek myth, where like Gay or Gaia is the mother goddess who kind of gave birth to the first kind of whatever order, and then the second order came out of that, and but the Gaia kind of went into obscurity. It was always there. Everything was kind of paid homage to her, but she was, Mother Earth essentially,
Hmm.
and that's what kind of Gaia is supposed to represent in Greek mythology, and so you have this kind of this idea of like the Great Mother, or in so many cultures, the Great Mother, the Mother Tree, in some African stories, the Tree of Life, and whether it's some form of mating with some form of other god, giving birth to others, there's this kind of like separation, the oldness of an old being that gave birth and brought forth life is as old as the hills. Maybe it's the hills herself. It's
Hmm.
that kind of idea of like, of
Sure.
course we can't remember it because the paps of Danu are down in Kerry, like literally.
I was gonna
Was that
say,
what you were thinking?
yeah, it's like she might be the Lendril, sir. Her titties sure are. Yes, there are hills in Ireland that are called Danu's tits. That's their name, the Paps of Danu.
Think it sounds a bit nicer as Gaeilge, but anyway.
I mean,
Um, but
like, yeah.
there's also like a very strange and like potentially like we talked about this before of like you're not really being sure about it, like, or whether you'd like whether you like this version of it. But in Ireland's Immortals by Mark Williams, A History of Gods and Irish Myth, he said something that kind of, I was like, oh, right, that's interesting. According to him anyway, he claimed that the godlike people, the Fear Day, was what it would have been in Irish, were what the Fae were called, or the fairies, or the Tuatha De Danann, before they were called the Tuatha De Danann. But then when Christianity came to Ireland, the people of God were also the Fear Day. And so you couldn't have the two kind of, so you had to separate it,
This is
and you had
this
to,
is like why Irish people call black people blue, because we already had a black man. That was the name of the devil. And so when we met people with actual like dark skin, we were like, okay, you can be blue. Because black means refers to the hair. So yeah, we had to do a linguistic jump of the people of the goddess to separate them and distinguish them from the people of God, being, I guess, the Christians or the angels. I'm not sure what
the guys that
they
came
were.
with Christianity,
The men of
uh,
God,
the men of
which
God.
must have been super confusing, by the way, for like
Very.
early Christians coming into Ireland being like, hi, I'm one of the men of God, and everyone going, get back under your hill. No, you're not. You're not 7 feet tall and shining and beautiful with golden sandals. Fuck
Yeah.
off.
And then, but then again, one of Mark Williams' ideas is like to belittle and put them under the hill and put them down and call them the little people and the wee folk, and to kind of make them not as important as they seem to have been for so very long, and to convert the kings first, because you got to get the kings on side, and then the people who follow get the kings on side of Christianity, and start calling the old gods little people, in order to reduce their status, and start calling them the people of a goddess, an obscure name, and she has no other mention. Danu, that is. So that just rang a bell of like, fuck, that's a really good explanation that I've not come across a better one
Mm.
than that. And I again, there's no right and wrong with these things. There's no that's it or
Yeah.
that's not it.
I mean,
But I do like it.
it's an interesting theory.
But it's the theory, of course.
It's an interesting theory. The reason that I don't follow it in the naming is because I think there is like, in order to change their name back to the Fair Day as a way of exalting them, is to buy into the idea that women are less than men, which is part of the idea that led them to be, in this theory, renamed to the Tuatha De Danann in the first place. And so that's why I'm like, cool, I don't care. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm not going to start calling them the Fair Day now. I'm not, because to do that, I think you have to accept that framework, whether it's true or not that that's what happened. It you've got to say, yes, you're correct, that being a goddess, being people of the goddess, is a demotion, and therefore, in order to get them back to their true status, we need to get them back on the masculine side. And I'm just like, nah, fuck that. They can stay the people of the goddess to me. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, again,
that's where that lands with me. And that's
sure.
why I've always been like, sure, like, cool. But
It's funny, that would have never occurred to me, but of course my sensibilities have not been primed to react to stimulus that would,
yeah,
uh,
you have not been primed to react to sexism, implicit or explicit,
yeah,
because you have not lived as a woman in the world. So
because I'm a
it's
dude. It's
totally
yeah,
fucking understandable. But yeah, that's my kind of thing with it, is like, yeah, all right, like, I don't agree with that framework. I'm not
yeah.
saying he's wrong. I'm absolutely not saying that he's wrong, or that I would have anywhere like the scholarly knowledge to even start debating any of that. I'm just saying, like,
My gut instinct says fuck you.
no, it's not even
Right.
fuck you. Just like, that's like, that may well be true, but I'm still not going to change their name in the way that I tell the stories. Like, I've never referred to them as the Fair Day, because, like I said, that would be accepting that goddess is a step down,
It's
and I
almost
don't.
it's almost kind of like where our brother lives in Guatemala. All of the beautiful colored clothes of the Guatemalan women and the tribes, they're all beautiful, amazing, and like that. But apparently, that was the slave uniform,
Yeah, that
and then
was
they acquired it.
imposed. It was
Uh,
imposed by the Spaniards so that the indigenous Guatemalans could not leave their own villages. But it has been reclaimed by the indigenous Guatemalans as their like their clothes, their traditional clothing, and they weave it and they wear it.
Yeah, yeah, and it is that reclaiming of that power, because I guess one of the reasons I did enjoy, and I in live shows I started calling them the Fear Day for a while, because I was like, why am I doing the fucking Two of the Dannon thing? What's that about? Because what I found it did was it went along the lines of the little people, the good folk, the sure, we'd be afraid of the Fae now, they'll come in and play a trick on you. And you're like, hang on, how the fuck, how did that happen when these
Mm.
huge, amazing, brilliant men and women of God with godlike power, with shining white skin and emerald eyes and blonde hair and tall and elegant and sharp and deadly? How do they become little? How do they become wee? Fuck that. They're fierce as fuck,
Yeah.
like, and they're
Yeah,
scary,
yeah,
and
oh totally. And
so.
like I get the reclamation, but that's you
Hmm.
got to buy into the idea that it is part of the diminution is calling them people of the goddess.
And again, it's the month to be paying tribute to the goddesses, because
Hmm.
Bridget, again, is so much associated with Danu herself, like, or how or how we can try and piece that together, if we can, because Bridget is called the as you talked about last week, the
Mary of
Irish
the Gale.
Mary, the Mary of
Yeah,
the Gale,
yeah,
damn it.
yeah.
Thank you. And with that, she has that huge status in
Mm.
Irish folk tales and myths and religion, and so she's up there. And even when I was researching Knock On Ya, which is a hill in Limerick, for the last story of the Goddess series, we have the this woman who has a place where people will go and pray and ask for help with crops and love and relationships and all of this, and this association with her. But a lot of the texts that I found were like confused. Was it Anya, or was it Anu, and was it Danu? Was it an older god? Because
Which is
there's always.
yeah, there's always those little etymological lines where you're like, wait a minute. And I think that's kind of the interesting thing about that's why we decided to go with this story, I guess, is the kind of setup. And that was kind of where I was going with it as well, was like this is a kind of a way of setting up the fluidity of the other stories. And the kind of those little uncertainties and those little doubts of like they're there, they're not there, they're alive, they're dead, they're on the waves, they're on the ninth wave. In next week's one, which is like, which one is the ninth one? You can't tell.
I
Which
know,
is the
yeah.
first one? You have to have it stop having waves for a second.
We'll get to that joke next week.
We will. Yeah, no, we'll get to that joke. We had to skip the 17 different jokes about the paps of Danu that came into my head as we were talking about that briefly, because I was like, this is not the time.
Give us one of them. What's the Paps of Danu joke?
Well, like, I mean, I'm just sitting here going, Jesus Christ, what is that? A fucking triple Z cup? Like, how would you even begin? And you're never going to get a shirt to button over them, lads. For fuck's sake. Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
I see where your mind
You
went
see
now.
where my
Right.
mind went. I was like, her back must really hurt. No wonder she's lying down. Um,
I was just thinking, like, Jesus, like,
listen.
they're great. That's whatever I think of about any breasts that go out. They're
Yeah, yeah,
great.
yeah.
And
I mean,
I'm stunned into silence.
as a haver of tig old biddies, they come with their own set of problems. And so I was just having a little moment of like empathy with the goddess, like mountain sized. That's a lot.
Literally mountain size.
It can be really tricky to get any clothes that fit you.
Oh my God.
Forget
So
about those like built-in sports bra tops. I'm going to
So
stop now. I'm going to stop now.
you're done. We're done. I opened the plug. It was my fault.
That's on you, buddy.
It's
That's
on
on
me.
you.
So come here. I before we wrap up on this particular story, I kind of want to see, an awful lot of our language, an awful lot of our customs, an awful lot of our beliefs in Ireland were banned by the British. We weren't allowed to speak our language. We weren't allowed gather. We weren't allowed to go to the sacred pagan sites, and there's an awful lot that was lost, and there's a huge amount of
And
the old stories, of course, that was lost as well. And
there was also, the first banning was not by the British. There was a church first that banned the paganism, and then there was a colonial army that banned the Catholicism. So that was very bound up with the paganism. So we we've talked about that. We kind of have two schisms in Ireland, if you like.
Sure. And but you constantly, whether it's a schism or a schism or a chasm, there's a few fucking things where people get lost down, and cultural chasms or whatever. We've gotten an awful lot lost. My question is, how much of that was directly on purpose, and how much of that was directly to eradicate females from the stories, like specifically taking, okay, there's Dana, we'll take him out, but Lou can stay. Okay, there's the Morrigan, she can stay ish because we can't get rid of her, but the Dagda, he can stay. So that's where I'm
like so much. I mean, it's one of those frustrating ones because like I remember the first time I heard somebody say, it was probably Richard Marsh, because it's usually Richard that we get some of the good stuff from when he's telling us things. Saying that from the way that she is spoken of, Cuchullin's trainer Scahawk definitely had an epic about her. Like there was a story of Scahawk at some point. You know that from the way they describe her, the way they talk about her. She had her own epic that was probably as substantial as the Tawn. And like, did somebody write that down and then somebody else burnt that book because you can't have women running around fighting topless? Did somebody hear that story and not write it down? Were they still telling that story at the time that writing was in Ireland, or had they stopped? Or in Scotland, and had they stopped? And we don't know. We don't know like how much of this was like there was definitely a move of some degrees towards like more of a patriarchal culture, more of a kind of an oppression of women culture in Ireland. But we don't really know where it started. And like, I know there are some people who are like, look, Anu, Morrigan, Brigid, Ireland was once a matriarchal culture. And I'm like, maybe. Like, there's certainly a lot. And like, there's certainly a lot of significant characters in Irish mythology that are women. You get a lot of like half of the druids in the stories are women. Berogue of the Mountain and people like this who can just fucking call up storms and float babies on waves. And like half of the, a bunch of warriors are women. All of the great heroes are trained by women, which you don't like. And actually, one of the things that I remember really striking me was when we were looking at, when I was doing a thing with the Bard, looking at the king stories, that all of the mothers of the kings were given as much attention as the fathers of the kings. And I was like, I'm not used to seeing that in mythology. Usually in mythology, it's all about the dad. Usually, like, you've got a special dad and then you've got some lady who's pretty. You know what I mean? And like, she's not really given any attention, except maybe her father like locks her away because he doesn't want people like stealing her like a thing. But there's kind of a little bit more focus given to women. But then at the same time, this is also a country where, the Brehan Law, which we've talked about before, the base unit of currency for a fine was a cummel, which is a word for a female slave. So like you paid in, cattle or slaves worth X number of cummels. That was how your fine was calculated. So like to say that this was an egalitarian culture is just like straight up wrong.
Well,
it was an incredibly stratified culture.
But sure, saying there was a potentially, or saying it was a matriarchal society doesn't equate to saying that it was egalitarian. That's the point.
Absolutely. And like maybe that is an indicator that it was a bit more matriarchal because maybe they named, females. But like the Brehan laws that we have that were actually recorded do have like it's incredibly stratified. It shows an incredibly stratified culture, and like I lost my ability to speak there for a second, but like a crime done against a man and a crime done against a woman of the same status, the fine would be higher to pay the man than it would be to pay the woman. So there's like, women are explicitly of lesser status than men in the Brehan Laws. But like, it's kind of remembered as, compared to the rest of Europe at the time, Irish women had an incredible degree of freedom. Incredible. Like, this was a time in Europe where women were belongings. You belonged to your father, and then you belonged to your husband. And the women who managed to achieve any kind of power usually did it after their husbands died, or if they had enough wealth to be able to kind of get around the rules. And there were several of them. There were several women doing important things in Europe in medieval times, although we often don't hear about them in history either. And that's something that, you know, various projects these days are trying to recover. So yeah, like, it's a little bit like, compared to the zero rights that people had, that women had in the rest of Europe, Irish women had some rights, and some of them were pretty good. We could get divorced. We could own our own property. So you didn't like combine your resources when you got married, which is why Maeve and Ali are able to have the pillow talk comparing wealth, because their wealth is not shared because they keep it. But then at the same time, you know, they're explicitly not equal to men in legal text. So it's very unanswerable. I think it is important for people to be able to imagine a society that is either matriarchal or egalitarian. Like, there are so few matriarchies still extant in the world. I think there's only two proper full-on matriarchal cultures. And like,
What are they?
there's one in Africa and there's one in Asia. And that's all I can fucking tell you at the moment, but I will try and look them up and actually give you the names of these tribes. They're tribal cultures that are matriarchal. Like, women are in charge, women run things, and like, men have less rights. And men do not do well in those cultures. They have higher rates of depression than the women do, to a similar proportion to the way women have higher rates of depression in this culture than men.
What? Men have higher rates of what? Men still have higher rates of depression in
Men
this
still have
culture.
extremely high rates of depression in this culture. But yeah, no,
Like,
it's not, basically my point being, it's not good. It's not a good system. It's not a better system to have one on top of the other.
As
Any
I was going to
imbalance is
say,
not great.
and what the conversation about like the matriarchy earlier is like, just because it would mean the matriarchy in that time would still meant women were getting sold as slaves, because any woman in charge might mistreat a woman just as equally as a man in charge will mistreat a man.
Yeah. And like,
you guys-
patriarchy doesn't mean men aren't mistreated. In fact, it can mean men are mistreated worse.
even fucking yeah. So I think it's bringing into this idea of conceptualizing that the egalitarian point of view that we're aiming for at the moment. We're at least envisaging it in some cultures, some areas of our culture. And I think my final question is, how do we make this celebration of the goddess, this month of this celebration of the Goddess Brigid and the Goddess Danu and all of the rest of them that we're talking about, how do we make this not a celebration of just women? How do we make it a celebration that no, I mean, like, a celebration that both sexes can get involved in? You know, that's kind of where, that's what I'm, because when you say it's you know, a goddess story, and then like Women and Warriors last year in the Sugar Club, a little fucking, it was a good few men there, but like largely women came to the show. When we say it's Women and Warriors or whatever show that we do, huge groups of women come out. No, probably because they're fucking sick shit of
like,
not getting represented, and fair enough.
I mean,
But
that's part
there's
of it.
also a cowing down and a kind of a men's reaction of going, right.
Well, I think there's two things at work. I think there's one of the things is the kind of ghettoization of media and consumption of things that has been like largely marketing driven, that has very much gendered products and TV shows and like films and things, because what they learned in the 1980s was that girls will watch shows with boys starring them in them, but boys will not watch shows where girls are the stars. And therefore we had about 2 decades of like just no fucking media for girls. unless it was like special interests media for girls, like girls need superheroes too, so we'll have She-Ra and it'll be great, that kind of shit. Sorry, not to be down on She-Ra. I don't think I've ever seen it. It's just like that was the 80s cartoons that I was growing up on.
I
Like,
have a lot of angry She-Ra fans posting in.
I don't know, man. I'm sure it's great. But like, yeah, that's part of it, is that you have a whole lot of men who are not used to consuming media that is aimed at women. And that is, I'm sorry, fucking rooted in misogyny. I'm not saying you're a bad person if you have some unworked out misogyny in your brain. It is in the water and it is in the air. And unless you're actively fucking working against it, it's in there. It's in me too. It's in all of us. That is the water we're swimming in. It's super fucking misogynistic. So a lot of guys will see stuff that is titled for women and go, therefore, that's not for me. And like, that's partly for guys, I think, that's kind of your job to work on that a little bit and go, okay, I have had it all my own way for a very long time, and maybe I need to like open up a little bit. And also, I think like one of the big things that I will, clarify, if ever we're talking about like the divine masculine or the divine feminine, or like feminine energy or masculine energy, is that like all of us have both of those things. The idea that men cannot worship a goddess or women cannot is like saying women cannot worship a god, is nonsensical. And I think it's part of like, I think a lot of men that I know who are interested in kind of shamanism and paganism, it's massively healing for them to get into this kind of feminine side. Now, I'm also not the best person to speak to about or to speak on what men need to do in order to feel welcome in goddess spaces, because my visceral reaction is they need to get the fuck over themselves, which is not very helpful and
No,
probably not very welcoming. But
no.
like that's kind of that's usually my reaction is like, listen, fucking shut up and listen to it. It'd be good for you. Eat your vegetables.
Yeah, it's an each vegetable
It's a
reaction.
little
Like,
bit like that.
just choke it down.
Just
Just
fucking,
choke it down. Yeah, I
you
mean,
might
it's
feel something.
no one wants to be told that about broccoli. Says a massive lover of broccoli.
I know broccoli is delicious.
I'll eat it raw as long as I have something wet to dip it in.
Aaron, that sounded like 17 kinds wrong. I'm sorry. That was just
I meant like a hummus or
no.
a
Stop
chili
talking about
pesto or anyway.
stop talking about dips.
How do I jump here? Okay, so look, I'm pretty happy with just
What do
putting
you
that out
think
there.
we can do to make men feel more welcome in our goddess series, Aaron? As a man who's telling stories about goddesses for the month, what did you do to feel more comfortable with it?
Okay, so I certainly had to sit with this idea that I have unchecked biases that have made me more used to uh, accepting sexism in my daily. And I had to sit with that for a while because I wasn't very happy with it. I didn't want to accept it. I was like, I'm not fucking sexist, leave me alone. So then I kind of sit with that for a while. So that's always good to check in on. I talk to a lot of women, female performers, female writers. Um, Most of them I went out with at the time for a brief period. So
Ah,
that helps.
yes. I remember Slutty Aaron. It
Brief
was a
periods.
whole thing.
I was how I got to know the divine feminine. Okay. This is why I didn't want to answer this question. And I guess I saw how easy it was for me to get by without getting shouted at a street, without walking down the street. I wouldn't have to worry what I'm wearing. I would compare my attitude of walking home late at night versus friends of mine who would absolutely have to get a taxi because just for the fact that they're a woman. And I would check myself on reactions to feminist speech, which really fucking got my back up for a long time because I found it very exclusionary. I found it very angry, and pushing men away, which I thought was there's a whole other discussion there to have about that. But then I had to check that and ask myself, what is it about that anger that I'm not comfortable with? And the more I encourage myself to be creative, open-hearted, loving, empathetic, I think they're virtues that associate themselves with what I understand as the kind of divine feminine energy. Kind of the divine masculine energy seems to be that that Ashtanga yoga style, that like hard, stern drive, go make the plan, do the thing, build a house, dig, guttural, cook, rah. That energy I can see in myself too. And I love when it grips me and takes me. And the softer, more fluid energies, when they arise, I like to acknowledge them as, this is kind of a female thing here. Not that I'm any less masculine in that. And I feel more balanced in doing that. And I tell stories that have very much eradicated women, or uh, only told their story through the lens of a man. And I've gone, why is that? Oh, it's actually a fucking better story if you make it from the woman's perspective. Thanks, Lady Gregory. We'll be talking to you about Cleana next week. You fucking toes. I have a few issues with her, but again, that's why I have issues with her for making a kind of a sexist view of a story eradicating a woman, which is, this is why I don't fall down on blaming men for patriarchy or blaming women for
I think that's one of the greatest misunderstandings of feminist discourse, is that people hear the word patriarchy and they think it means men. And so when feminists say we're angry at the patriarchy, a lot of people hear we're angry at men, and it's like that's not what anybody's saying. Patriarchy is a system that everybody is part of and involved in and replicating unconsciously all the fucking time.
Sure, and the men's pain within that structure is often glossed over and not looked at, which is one of those things. Is like, oh, hang on, like men and women suffer sometimes not equally, but sometimes fucking unbalanced in ways. You can say whatever about it, but you can take numerous examples and show how women suffer more than men, or you can highlight other examples and show how men
I
died
think it's
more in wars
I
or
think
whatever.
the oppression Olympics is never very productive, because everyone just gets into
It's
their own
not,
victimhood and
and
saying,
that's
well,
why
yeah, well, this happened to me. And it's like, all right, yeah, but that's not actually moving the
that's why
discussion
I'm
on
not.
at all.
And that's why I'm not interested in having those examples thrown around, because I think it is important to go, okay, it's not a system that's done any gender very good. And I think, how I've certainly come to celebrating Bridget on Imbolc was saying thank you, mother, and swimming into very cold water and feeling like I was back in the womb. And Imbolc means in the womb, and that idea of being completely surrounded by water, something completely nature, and completely connected to a more divine power than I can ever manifest myself, without some force of nature completely viscerally taking over my body, and just floating and being held in that space, that I felt like I did today. And I kind of bowed my hat and thanked Bridget, Anu, and all the ones before for helping me be where I am today.
Awesome. That was a beautiful answer. Thank you, Aaron. I'm expecting that. I was expecting you to be like, actually, I just breathe a few times and listen to it. But yeah, I think that illuminates. It's a lot easier to say than to do. The getting over ourselves is a process of years sometimes, and it's ongoing for all of us. Anyway, listen, I think we're probably
yeah.
I think we're probably talked out about the goddesses. We will be back next week with another goddess story told by Aaron, which is Tun Cleana, Cleana's Wave. And we will be chatting about that the following Sunday. And then we'll have Sive, and then we'll have Knockanya, And then at the end of the month, we'll have a live stream, and we will hopefully have a special guest that we'll be able to
We
announce soon.
will indeed. And it was also just gone by, if you're listening to this, of a Sunday or afterwards. The first week of February was Children's Mental Health Week. And I know an awful lot of our listeners have kids at home and have been having a tough time because you're trying to homeschool and no one got taught how to do that. So never mind parents' mental health is Mental Health Week for kids, which I think was just a beautiful thing. And we will have shared a few things. We're recording this in the past, so
Oh
I'm
my
talking about
God.
what I'm about to do.
What is time, Aaron?
Yeah,
It's
time,
lockdown. Time
sorry.
is soup.
So in the soup of time, I'm hopefully going to be releasing, or will have released, a few things on social media about it. Oh man, that's hard to talk about. And hopefully your kids' mental health is grand. Ask them, talk to them like an adult. See if they're okay. See if they're, random. Don't go up to random kids and ask them if they're all right. That's going to scare them, especially in lockdown. But I think it's good to actually associate a week or give a week over to kids' mental health, because that's really important too. And we're all a bit mental, but maybe check in and maybe tell them a story. That always worked for me.
God, it's a good thing to do. It used to keep him very happy on long car rides.
All right, that was a talk.
All right, nice one.
Nice one, Sloan.